It's 8:30, so yeah, we'll kick off and people will probably start coming in. So just a quick warm welcome from myself. I'm Lucy, I'm on the welfare team, and we are so excited to have the incredible Ian Wooten with us today. So I will let him introduce himself properly, but just a few housekeeping rules. If we could ask everyone to have their cameras and mics off just throughout the chat, just so it doesn't slow things down. This is being recorded, this session. And please do use the chat facility. If you have any questions, use the wealth of knowledge that Ian has and any questions that come up. And so just a little bit about Ian before you introduce yourself properly. So Ian is a consultant, clinical and forensic psychologist. He's worked within the psychological setting for over 20 years. Through his company, Flexible Mind Psychology, he offers a different approach for those who assume to be okay on the outside, but who are actually struggling on the inside. Ian focuses on connections and development of fulfilling relationships. So he holds specific training and has implemented CBT, group analytic psychotherapy, dialectical behavioural therapy, blimey, and radically open dialectical behaviour therapy, which aims to treat disorders and over control. So yeah, Ian, I can't even say that. That's how incredible they are and how your work is.
Thank you, Lucy. I appreciate the very warm, positive introduction. Comes with lots of pressure, but I'll see what I can do. Thank you very much.
Over to you.
Cheers. It's good to be here. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I see we've got almost 50 people in the meeting, so that's amazing. I'm really privileged to be able to speak to so many people for such a fantastic initiative by the EIC. So thanks for inviting me. So as Lucy mentioned, I'm a psychologist. My company is called Flexible Mind Psychology. And as Lucy mentioned, I specialize in working with people who are what I would call over-controlled. So these are people who often struggle with flexibility and struggle with change. These people sometimes might be people who are rigid in their views and their beliefs, and perhaps in the way that they see the world. What we might say is that they're set in their ways sometimes. Over-controlled people tend to not try new things or take risks, and they often stay in their comfort zone as well. And another thing about over-controlled people is that they struggle with relationships, and that includes both forming new relationships and also developing a sense of connectedness or intimacy with people that they already know. So this can leave them feeling lonely, feeling disconnected, and feel unsupported as well. So that's a bit about my general work. But what I'm here to talk about today is the idea of change in general, or what we might call life transitions. And in order to explore this idea of change, I'm going to hopefully think about how we feel about change in general, different types of change that we might encounter in life, and how we respond or try to cope when we face change. And then finally, if we can, try and think about how we can prepare for change in a way that is healthy and effective as well. As Lucy said, if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them, but we'll talk about them at the end. So feel free to put them in the chat. Any other comments that you might have, be good to have a bit of a discussion when we get to that point. Okay, so I'm going to talk about various types of change, or consider various types of change that we might all experience at different times in our life. So there's a bunch of examples here on the screen, one of which is the one on the far left is retirement, and I want to put that one up there for us to consider as we go forward, because that's a very work-related experience that probably most of us will face at some point in our lives. The other one that isn't on the list actually is redundancy. Not something that everybody experiences, but also very work-related as well. So they might be two that you bear in mind, but if you're facing any other changes, then hopefully what we're going to talk about will still be relevant. But as you can see, there's a whole range of experiences that do constitute change or life transitions as well. But I guess the question is, why are we here talking about this? Why is change such an important topic? Well, it's because change or transition can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable for people for many reasons. One of the reasons is that it's often forced upon us. Change or the experiences that come to us are often something that we don't choose or we wouldn't want to choose. So redundancy might be an example of that. Change also means that we're going to have to do something differently. There's something about our life that's going to be different, and that can often be scary. It can also mean that we might not feel skilled or we don't know what to do. When this change happens, we often feel that it represents the unknown. We don't know what to expect. We don't know what it's going to be like. And that sense of uncertainty can be very uncomfortable. It can leave us feeling like we don't have control. It can leave us feeling like we lose our sense of composure or our ability to predict and react in a way that's going to be comfortable or effective. And this can leave us feeling uncertain because we don't know the outcome. We don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to turn out at the end of it. So for some people, as I mentioned, the idea of change evokes a feeling of fear. We often fear change and the things that are going to be different. And this fear manifests in many different ways, but one thing that we might experience as a result of the fear is anxiety. Okay, so anxiety is a normal experience. Anxiety is something that we all face at different times, and sometimes anxiety can be healthy, as it can help us to prepare for the situation that we're facing and to get us ready to deal with it when it comes. However, when the anxiety is too high, it can lead to unhealthy or unhelpful responses. So on this slide, you can see some of the different thoughts that we might have when we face anxiety. We might think that we can't bear the change or the idea. We might think that we want to do it, but we can't do it. We doubt ourselves. We might think about putting it off. We might just say no, or say, I can't do it. Or we might feel that we want to retain that sense of being in control. Or we might try to avoid it, go home, as it says there on the right. And essentially, we can often want to avoid such experiences as well. So some of the things that we might do here is to try to keep things the same. We might put off making changes. We might avoid planning ahead, or we might simply not allow ourselves to think about it as well. So what about these responses? Well, change is a natural life occurrence. We can't stop change from happening. Life transitions, similarly, they will happen inevitably. Things like leaving school, graduating, starting a new job, and retirement are things that will happen as we go through life. They are natural transitions that happen to all of us. They come in different shapes and sizes, but we all have change that occurs naturally. But some changes are forced upon us, and we have no control over them. So again, things like redundancy, illness, bereavement, or losing a friend for whatever reason. These are things that happen and are forced upon us, and we might feel we have no control over them. Therefore, resisting change is only likely to delay the inevitable. Because we can't stop them from happening, it's going to happen eventually anyway, at various points in our life. So when we resist change, it actually doesn't help. It actually just makes the problem worse. When we avoid, we actually tell our brain that it's going to be, the thing that we're avoiding is going to be unpleasant. It makes the idea of the change or the transition seem even more scary than we first thought it was. We might even be sending the message to our brain that that change is dangerous, that it will harm us, and that we won't be able to handle it. And this turns the idea of change into a bigger, scarier prospect. We become even more afraid of it. So, what can we do if we feel afraid or resistant to the change? Well, the first thing I would suggest is that we don't deny the change. The first thing that we might want to do is accept that something is going to be different. the change is going to happen. The transition is going to occur. And this might mean that we need to recognize that life is not going to be as it was before. It's not going to stay normal as it was previously. So because it's not going to be normal, don't try and carry on as if it is normal. And don't try and get back to being normal as well. People often go through a transition and say to themselves, I just want to get back to normal. And I understand why that's what they want to happen. But when changes happen or transitions occur, normal is not going to be the same again. Instead, we might have to establish a new normal. So being open to the idea that change is going to happen and actually that normal is going to be different is really important. But perhaps consider that the new normal does not have to be a bad thing. Some might even say that change is exciting. Okay, so if this describes something that you're experiencing or have experienced, then essentially what we're talking about here is changing the way that we think about change, the way that we approach the idea of that life transition. What we're talking about here is adopting an open mind. This is often a really important step in coping with change. If we don't change the way that we're thinking, then actually we're unlikely to be able to make changes in our behavior or our approach. We're unlikely to be able to sustain any differences that we incorporate because our thoughts are really what drive our behavior, and our thoughts can really hold us back if we don't think differently. Whenever we want to make any changes in life, it's our thoughts that are the place where we need to start. Otherwise, we're going to just come back to the original responses and behaviors. So the idea of adopting an open mind is really important. So what is open-mindedness? It's a phrase that's used a lot, but really, what does it mean? I guess what I would suggest that it involves essentially looking at things from a different point of view. It involves asking yourself questions about your original point of view. Instead of staying stuck or fixed in our point of view, the way that we see the world and the way that we do things, it can be really healthy to be able to ask ourselves, is there another way of looking at this? Is there another way of considering what's going on here? How would another person describe this situation? Is it a fact, or is it just my perception that we're talking about here? And if you notice that other people share different views, then that might suggest that it's not a fact. We might also ask ourselves things like, could there be another possibility, another way of going about this? Could there be some value in what another person is suggesting, rather than it just being my way or the highway? The other phrase I would use here when it comes to open-mindedness is the idea of loosening our grip on our beliefs or on our expectations. So expectations can be really helpful when we're going into a new situation or we're facing a change. We have expectations, and that can be a really important thing to help us prepare for what we're about to face. You know, if we're going into, I don't know, a situation with new people, we might anticipate what it's going to be like, and therefore think about what we're going to say, what we're going to do, and to make that help the outcome positive. However, if our expectations are too strong or too rigid, then it can be unhelpful too, because it means we don't have that flexibility. We don't have the ability to just adapt or respond to whatever is actually going on. So the point about expectations is to loosen your grip on them. Doesn't mean you have to disregard them altogether. Doesn't mean that you have to just be different for the sake of it. It means that you go into that situation with some sense of what it might be like, but also with an open mind. Another thing about open-mindedness is the willingness to do things differently if this is necessary, and if doing things differently is likely to move you towards where you want to be or who you want to be. So don't just go into any situation doing things the same way that you've always done them. Be prepared to change that if that is helpful. Open-mindedness can be the way to determine whether or not that's helpful or not. And then finally, a really important point is about the idea of being willing to try new things, to be flexible, and importantly, to go out of your comfort zone. So we all have a comfort zone. Now, what that means is the way that we do things, the way that we think about things, the way that we solve problems and make decisions. We might do that in a way that's very familiar, and that can represent our comfort zone. It can keep us feeling secure and safe. But when we're trying new things, it's important that we accept that it might feel different, it might feel weird, and it will probably feel uncomfortable. But recognize that feeling uncomfortable is a natural experience. We can't go through life without feeling some discomfort. And so remember that discomfort will occur, but it is not going to harm us. Feeling uncomfortable is okay. It's just a sensation. Might not be pleasant. By definition, being uncomfortable is not pleasant, but it is not going to harm us. So if we can stay in the uncomfortable position that we find ourselves in, what will happen is that the discomfort will gradually reduce. If we stay there, we will change our perception of the situation, and our brain will gradually recognize that it's okay to be in that situation, that the discomfort is not actually as bad as we might have thought it would be. Okay. We talked a lot about change. We talked a lot about transition. What's important to recognize is that when a change in our life might happen, not everything in our life is going to change. There are many things that don't change. There are many things that will stay true, and the important parts of our personality, for example, are going to stay there. We're going to still be the same person that we were before the transition. Our personality is going to be the same. Our interests are probably going to be the same as well, but also our beliefs, the things that we stand for, the things that we consider to be important, they are all going to be the same. We're going to be the same person, essentially. And it's really important that we recognize that just because one thing in our life is changing, not everything changes. And actually, the phrase I'm going to use here is our values. If we can be aware of our values and recognize what they are and recognize that they don't have to change, they can actually help us. They can help us to deal with what we're facing. And also, we can use those values to make decisions, to think about how we're responding, and as a guide for the way that we are dealing with the situation that we're in. So, for example, if we're facing a very difficult problem or a decision that we have to make, leaning on our values and thinking about what's important to us can help us to decide, what is the way that I want to be in this situation? What do I want to do that's going to be true to myself? It's going to help me to move towards the person that I want to be and to live the life that I want to be. So it might be worth just having a think about what your values are. So this picture here has a few suggestions about different kinds of values that are important to people. Some of these things might be important to you. For example, if you have the value of respect, then even when you're facing a difficult, stressful situation with other people who are giving you problems and being challenging, maintaining your sense of respect can be really, really important to you. And if you maintain that, even if you don't get the outcome that you want, you can still go to bed at night thinking, well, at least I stuck to my value of being respectful. There are lots of advantages of sticking to our values. One of the advantages is that idea that we don't feel guilty, we don't beat ourselves up for our behavior because we believe in it. We believe it to be important, and we recognize that that is something that we want to maintain. No matter what's going on in our life, if we stick to our values, we're going to feel better about ourselves. The other advantage is we don't have to make repairs, or we don't have to rebuild the damage that we've done if we've not acted according to our values. That's likely to reduce our sense of anxiety because, again, we're acting in a way that's true to ourselves. So have a think about what your values might be. Just one more point on values before I go on any further, is that I often think about values as being like a lighthouse. Okay, so bear with me on this analogy, but imagine that your life, the chapter change or transition that you're facing, feels a bit like you're in rocky waters. You know, you're in a storm. There are rocks, there are huge waves crashing. Life feels really hard at the moment. If you have a lighthouse, if you have your values, then it gives you a sense of direction. Even when things are really tough, you still got the light that you know that you're heading towards. The values represent the life you want to live or the person you want to be. And that is the lighthouse. So keeping your eye on the light, keeping your eye on the values is what I would recommend here. So knowing what you want to be like, how you want to live is essentially the direction you want to be going in. Now, what do values mean? What I would suggest here is that you fill your life with things that matter to you. So these might be hobbies, these might be friends, these might be purposeful activities that you get some sense of fulfillment or satisfaction from. So I guess retirement is a really good example of this. When a person retires, obviously, not having that work role anymore leaves them with a lot of time and a lot of flexibility in what they're going to do. So filling that time with things that are important to you, things that matter to you is really important. So it's important to know what matters to you. If you don't know, then it could give you a sense of not having a purpose or a role. But the other thing, as I said before, is be the person that you want to be. So when you interact with people, think about the way that you're coming across, the way that you're presenting. Are those behaviors and the way that you're presenting, is it consistent with how you want to be and how you want to be perceived by other people, but also how you want to see yourself? So again, using the values can be that guide. And I would suggest that setting goals around those values, putting things within your diary, within your planner, thinking about how you're going to interact with people, what you're going to do in certain situations can be a really important step to help you deal with the things that you're facing. Another thing that is not going to change, no matter, well, I guess it depends what the transition is, but it's important to recognize that our relationships are unlikely to completely change, at least. Obviously, if we're facing a bereavement or we've lost a friend or something like that, then there is a relationship that we've lost. However, other relationships are likely to still be there. So it's important to recognize that these relationships usually involve some support. The people who are closest to us are the people who care about us. And those people, when they care about us, they want to offer support. They want to help us. However, they can only help us if they know how we're feeling, if they know what's going on in our life. Much as we might want it to happen, people can't mind read. People can't guess what's going on. And what often happens, and this goes back to that sense of over control that I talked about at the beginning, is that when people are struggling, they might withdraw, close down, and present in a way that appears to be fine. So they put a brave face on, they put that mask on, and they say, yeah, I'm fine. The word fine is overused. It's often a word that is used to disguise true feelings. So instead, of saying that you're fine, it can be really helpful if we can share what is really going on for us. Being open, being honest, sharing our feelings, and telling our closest friends and relatives and partners how we're coping. Doing this has lots of benefits. So one of the main benefits here is that when we share our feelings with people, they know where they stand with us. And this means that they feel trusted. When we reveal our vulnerabilities, i.e. our problems, our feelings, we're showing that we trust the other person. If we tell somebody something that's very personal, they could use it against us. Let's face it, when we reveal a vulnerability, they could use it against us, but we're trusting that they're not going to do so. And that person would feel that we're investing in them. What usually happens when we reveal something to other people is that they share their vulnerabilities with us too. And this forms a greater sense of trust. And that trust improves the relationship. It helps us to feel closer and connected. And then we're more likely to feel supported as well. It might be that they can also offer us some practical support. So that's a bonus. But really, the key point here is that by revealing vulnerabilities, we increase trust, and the trust leads to connectedness or a closer relationship. Okay, now that's all relevant to people who have close relationships already. But I don't know, there might be people out there who think, well, I haven't really got anyone who I'm close to. So it might be that we need to build relationships. But actually, it's the same process when we build relationships too. Even if we meet someone for the first time, it's important, if we want to get to know that person and build a relationship with them, it's important that we share something about ourselves. Now, I'm not saying that you go into the post office and tell the cashier everything about your personal life. That probably wouldn't work. They're going to feel a bit overwhelmed. What we need to do is to show our vulnerability, but gradually. So take small risks in being able to disclose things that people didn't know about us, things that might represent our opinions, our preferences, our strengths and weaknesses, things that we would tell people when we get to know them, but doing it very, very gradually so that we're not pushing people away. If we reveal too much too soon, then it might overwhelm the other person. It might make them think that you're a bit needy. So it's important to do it step by step. And when you do it, if you share something personal about yourself, just observe the other person's response. Have a look at how they react. Do they seem to be interested and warm? And do they reveal anything about themselves? Because we don't want a one-sided relationship. It's important that we let the other person join us in this sense of openness and this intimacy that we're talking about here. Okay, so I've only been going for half an hour, and I'm going to summarize what I've talked about. Gone a bit quicker than I expected. Apologies for that. So we've talked about different transitions and situations that involve change. We've talked about a number of things that can happen in life, some of which are forced upon us, some of which are natural things that occur as we go through life. We've talked about why change can be difficult as well, and we've talked about our responses to change. Our responses often involve resistance and avoidance. And when we resist or we avoid, it can be unhelpful. We talked about how when we avoid, we send those messages to our brain to say, this is a dangerous situation, I can't cope. And that makes the fear even bigger than it was before. We then talked about open-mindedness, and we did this in order to try and explore different perspectives, and we can do this by asking questions about our original point of view. Instead of just staying in that fixed perspective that might be one that causes problems or makes a situation difficult, using other questions to explore can be helpful. We also talked about expectations and the importance of loosening our grip on them instead of just letting those expectations seem rigid. If we have rigid expectations, then it might not turn out that way, and then we're stuck. So loosening our grip can help us to prepare for different outcomes and different scenarios as well. And we mentioned the idea of doing things differently, being willing to do things differently if that is necessary as well. And this involves stepping out of our comfort zone. Our comfort zone might help us to feel safe, but it keeps us stuck at the end of the day. If we continue to do things the way that we always have, then we're not going to feel any different at the end of that. So instead, the idea of sitting with discomfort, tolerating it and putting up with it, rather than moving away from it or pushing it away, is really important. And this can help us to become more comfortable with being uncomfortable, and it allows our brain to adapt as well. And then finally, we talked about how not everything will change. Just because we're going through one change or a life transition doesn't mean that everything is going to be different. And one of the things that we talked about that's important is to remember your values. So this involves what's important to you and who you are as a person. And I suggested setting goals that help you to move towards the person that you want to be and the things that you want to do. And then finally, remember those who care about you, the relationships that you have that are ongoing, and use the support that they offer. This might involve sharing your feelings and vulnerabilities with them, doing this in a gradual way, if it's about building the relationship or if it's a new relationship. And it's based upon this formula at the bottom here, which is that when we're open, it leads to trust, and that trust leads to connectedness. Okay. We have finished my talk already. I'm apologizing, Lucy, for that being a bit shorter than anticipated, but I hope it was relevant and helpful.
Yeah, honestly, and that was amazing. There was so much food for thought in that, and I think the big thing that was coming up for me is that acceptance. And I felt since going into my 30s and even through my 20s, I was struggling with, I think, acceptance and finding myself. So there was so much I've taken from that, and just our thoughts, thoughts driving us, and that just small goals and those kind of, not, I don't want to say simple things, but things that we can change in our control, such as our thoughts, something, we're in control of that. I just thought that was really eye-opening for me. So yeah, we've got a few questions for you, Ian.
Brilliant.
So would you say, I know at the beginning you were talking about like change, would you say that change and loss bring like comparable feelings?
Well, it's a really good question. My thought is that loss is a form of change. So when we go through life, we lose people. I guess that's the obvious example. We experience bereavement, sadly. And the feelings that we experience when we have a bereavement or a loss amount to life being different, losing that relationship and what that person meant to us is absolutely a form of change. As I said before, we can't get back to the life we had before because that person's not going to be there, or that thing that we've lost is not going to be there. And the feelings that we have, it might involve thoughts of, well, how am I going to cope with this? What am I going to do? It might involve a sense of not having control as well. And I would say that the process of dealing with loss, we talk about that word grieving quite a lot. So for me, the word grieving is all about moving towards acceptance. Going back to your point, Lucy, that acceptance is really important. When we lose something or somebody, we often have no control over that loss. So accepting that is really necessary, not fighting it. There's a another little formula that I sometimes use, which I haven't mentioned today, which relates to pain. And we all experience pain in life. Pain is another natural life occurrence, and this certainly loss might involve pain. But it's our response to pain that's really important. And the formula that I'm referring to is that pain plus resistance equals suffering. So pain is natural. Resistance is our response to pain sometimes. If we resist it, then we're more likely to suffer. So suffering, I guess, is the experience of emotional turmoil, but the pain is just the event itself. So if we resist it, then we're more likely to move into that suffering state. And that can certainly apply to loss as well. So the process of grieving a loss, whether it be loss of a person or loss of a job or, I don't know, loss of financial well-being or whatever it might be, it's about changing our expectations. And grieving it is the process of moving towards that acceptance.
So interesting, because it is that, I think sometimes when people they're really struggling with a friendship that's broken down, or like with them, or they're that kind of person, it's essentially grief itself, I suppose, with what you're saying. Grief doesn't have to be losing a loved one and someone passing away. It's all like feels interlinked.
Yeah, and I think that grieving is it's a psychological process. And sometimes grieving can be just grieving the loss of an idea or the loss of a belief that we have, or the loss of an expectation. You know, grieving an expectation can be really important. When we're approaching a situation and it doesn't turn out as we wanted it to be, we can be really angry and we might think, well, it should be like this, or that person should have done that. But actually grieving that expectation might mean, well, is it really that that person should have reacted in that way? Is there another way that that person could have behaved and that might be reasonable, rather than expecting it to have been as I wanted it to be? So loosening your grip or letting go of that idea of that expectation is another form of grieving as well.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. What's a couple here? What would you recommend to someone fearing and avoiding any discomfort? So if they have just that feeling, that sensation of that discomfort that they kind of feel very much an avoidance, what would be a good starting place for them to maybe ease their way into it if there is a situation that's coming up?
Yeah, I love that question. And the idea of working with discomfort is something I spend a lot of time talking to people about. The first thing I would recommend is to identify what your comfort zone is. And it might be that your comfort zone is your house, or it is your routine, or it is specific people that you talk to, but nobody else. So recognize what your comfort zone is and what the limits of your comfort zone are as well. So let's just use a house as a person's comfort zone as an example, because it's quite a tangible, clear example. If that person always stays in their house and doesn't go outside, then we're going to have this increase in the divide between the comfort zone and the rest of the world that's scary. So the scary outside world is going to become more and more scary if they stay in their house and don't go out. So identifying those limits of the comfort zone can mean that you have the opportunity to then think, well, am I prepared to step outside of it? And the next step, having identified that, would be to do just that. Now, we had that image on the screen of the woman who was dipping her toe outside the circle. And I guess that's what I'm talking about here, is that if your house is your comfort zone, then maybe just going and standing in the garden for 5 minutes is the first step. And then stand at the front gate, or stand in the road, or go for a 2-minute walk down the road. And doing that will probably be an uncomfortable experience. But what I would recommend is that you carry on doing it anyway. And that by doing that, you will be telling your brain, actually, I can survive this. This is okay. Now, I'm not saying you have to go on a 10-mile hike or go to a party or anything like that, but it is that idea of gradually increasing your exposure to the discomfort. And what we do there is change our relationship with that experience. So instead of thinking that that is something scary, we will gradually come to recognize that it's okay, that we can do it. Now, obviously, I'm talking about going out of the house because it's a tangible example, but it might be that your comfort zone occurs in other ways. Your routine might be your comfort zone. And by doing things the same way every day or approaching a situation from the same angle every time might be really comfortable, but it might be trying to do something different to just experience discomfort. And I know it might sound a bit trivial, but sometimes I say to people, if you wear a watch on your left wrist, try wearing it on your right. It feels really weird. If you try it, it feels uncomfortable. But it's about changing your relationship with discomfort so that instead of always sticking to the same thing, you can tell your brain, I'm okay with discomfort. It's normal. It's a natural occurrence. And actually, we can learn from it as well.
Yes, that kind of when flexibility, it kind of comes back to that giving yourself a bit more flexibility. And I think it's something actually which I'm going to take from this is there's a new gym that's opened, and I was thinking I do want to go and try it, but then I was thinking, gosh, it's going to be new. There's going to be I don't really know anyone there, so it's given me a bit of a go ahead, Ian, to definitely just give it a try. Try one class, give it a go.
And if it's yeah, and going to the gym's a good example. I find gyms a bit scary myself, actually, but going in there, it can be a bit intimidating, or you're kind of wondering, where is everything? And everybody else looks so comfortable with it. And you have these perceptions, which are probably coming from your anxiety about going. You become more aware of the cues that make you feel uncomfortable. But yeah, I think going in there, feeling the discomfort and staying with it is essentially what I would be recommending there.
Great, thank you so much. We've got another one here. So acceptance is something we hear about all the time. Can you give us any strategies to help accept certain circumstances or life changes?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a concept called radical acceptance. Okay. Don't let the hippie word radical put you off. All right. So radical means going all the way, doing it fully. And that is a really important part of true acceptance. When we're accepting something in a way that is healthy or helpful, it involves going all the way and accepting everything about it, not just accepting it partly or partially. So I guess that this goes back to your point, Lucy, about things that we can control and things that we can't control. And also goes to my point about resistance as well. So if we're only partially accepting something, then we're resisting it. There's a degree of resistance in there. We are thinking, well, I don't really like that bit, so I'm not happy about it. That's the resistance bit. So radical acceptance is about accepting the whole thing. So if we think about, I don't know, let's think about redundancy as an example. You might be trying to accept, okay, I've got to move on and I've got to find a new job and whatever. But if your brain is still saying, yeah, but it's really unfair, then that's not fully acceptance. That's you still resisting or holding on to some of the circumstances that have led to that. So radical acceptance is based upon the idea that there is always a reason for something. So that can help us to fully accept, to radically accept. Now, the reason for, let's take redundancy as an example. We might not like the reason why we're being made redundant. We might not like the reason why we're retiring. We might not like the reason why we've lost a relationship, but there is still a reason for it. We don't have to accept that. We don't have to agree with that reason, but understanding that there is a reason is really helpful. So let's take an example of, let's take an example of being made redundant. You know, the manager or the company, the organization has its reasons. You might think it's unfair, you might not like those reasons, but just accepting that there is a reason and that everything that happened in the background to that decision is part of that reason can help us to accept it. So there's a difference between agreeing and accepting. We don't have to agree, but understanding that there is a reason is the acceptance.
Really good way of looking at it. I think I always think back to my years of being like a child and things, and really struggling with that. You know, being like, no, you're not going to do that. Maybe I'm like kind of stamping my feet, like, well, yes, I can. And not you know, accepting it, but not agreeing with it. And I think as older, I'm like, you know, being now an adult, you need to be very much fluid and accepting everything. But no, we have a choice in that.
Yeah.
That's
well, the other point there about things that we can control and can't control is important too. If it's something that we do have control over, then we might not need to accept it. You know, that there might still be an avenue for change there. Let's take a relationship as an example. You know, if a relationship is faltering or there's problems within the relationship, it's okay to not accept that it's over. It's okay to fight for the relationship and make changes and adapt and so forth. But if it comes to the point where the person, you know, your partner has said, sorry, that's enough and I'm not changing my mind, then there might be a point where acceptance that you don't have control is important. So recognizing what you can control and what you can't control can be an important step in that as well.
I've got another one here. On retirement, a 4-year work habit is going to be difficult.
Sorry, Lucy, you're really muffled. I don't know if anybody else finds your microphone muffled.
I'm having trouble with my laptop, so I'm on my phone. Can you hear me now?
That's a bit better, yeah, thank you.
So someone said on retirement, a 40-year work habit is going to be difficult to accept.
Yeah.
That in there, just
I think it's important not to undermine, you know, the significance of retirement. It is a very important life transition, and I guess that's why those, you know, building those habits, the building a new lifestyle and thinking about the person you are and the relationships you have is really important. What I'm not saying is that acceptance is easy, and I would say it's a process. And I think that it would be arrogant of me to just say, oh, you know, there's a reason for that, just accept it, it'll be fine. It's something to work towards psychologically, that it's about again and again accepting. Sometimes we might need to remind ourselves of all those things that have led up to that moment, and then thinking about your strategy for going forward as well. So it's a process, it's a journey. Acceptance is a journey, not just a point in time where suddenly there's a light bulb and everything's fine.
Yeah. Like when you said that, really what kind of, you need to keep working at it when like going outside, you know, even just 2 minutes a day, that kind of, I feel like they're quite linked. Just keep working at it.
Yeah.
Got another one here. So if because I know relationships was a big thing, and that having a circle of support around you. If someone doesn't have that, can they build on working a relationship with themselves?
Can you say that again, Lucy? I'm just trying to figure out what that.
So would you say if someone doesn't have a support network around them, could they look at building a relationship in their sense of self with themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I would always encourage a person to build a social network outside themselves. But I think the question is more about how they feel within themselves, their sense of self. And I would say that going back to that values point really relates to that. Knowing who you are, knowing what's important to you, knowing what you stand for, can give a person a real sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. So I would definitely encourage working on that. You know, I sometimes ask people to literally list their values. And having listed their values, you can then think, well, how am I going to move towards that? Particularly if it's a value that they're not currently achieving. So it might be, for example, a person whose value is to be kind. Okay, and they maybe find themselves not being very kind, and I'll say, well, how are you going to achieve that then? You know, so it's all well and good saying, yeah, I want to be kind, but what does it look like in your life? Are you going to stand next to a door and open it for everybody who walks past all day? That would be kind, but it's not realistic. So it might be thinking about how you embody those characteristics. So using the example of kindness, it might be that you think, well, I'm going to work on my ability to give people the benefit of the doubt, for example, which is a kind thing to do instead of judging them or labeling them or dismissing them. So absolutely, I think it's really positive and healthy to be able to think about your sense of self. The question there really is, who do you want to be? And thinking about, you know, kind of drawing a line on the past, thinking, don't worry about what you've been like before, but who do you want to be as you go forward? Thinking about the period of time between now and your funeral. Okay, how are you going to be coming across? How are you going to see yourself in that period of time? What does that look like, and how do you achieve?
So much, Ian. I think about 2 minutes past. So I could sit and chat to you all day. You have such a wealth of knowledge, and I've taken so much from today's talk. So yeah, just a huge thank you for all of your time and your slides, and yeah, pearls of wisdom, and so much to think about. And yeah, I think that's that part of things. When you said funeral, I'm like, it's never going to get to that point, you know, but actually it's exactly that. So yeah, thank you so much. To everyone that's tuned in, we've got our, oh, I think my head's on. Are you okay just to minimize that? There's a tiny, I think there.
What am I doing, sorry?
Can you see the boxes just in front of that bit there, Ian? Yeah, if you press minimize there.
I don't know where I'm looking, sorry.
Oh, so it's in the top corner next to the cross. It's just gone across the slide. There's been like a box. There we go. Lovely.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah, so this is our helpline number. It's operated Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And if you're anything's come up for you today, anything we can help support with, please do give us a call. And I think there's one more slide.
There we go.
Yay, thanks, Ian. And yeah, thank you so much for attending today, and for everyone's thoughts and feelings. And yes, so if you'd like to further support the EIC, you can make a donation directly by scanning the QR code on the screen. So yeah, just another humongous thank you, Ian. You are incredible.
Pleasure. Thank you. I hope it was helpful. Sorry, it was a bit shorter than anticipated, but
no, you know what? I find the bit at the end, kind of the open conversation, is really good. So I think so many people took lots from that as well.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Cheers. Take care. Bye.